Center for International Forestry Research, based in Bogor, just outside Jakarta. And today I'm going to talk about climate change impact chains in coastal areas. So I'm going to give you a brief background. Dynamic seascapes are what characterizes coastal areas, for example, including mangroves, corals, and seagrass beds. Climate change alters the environment and consequently alters the lives of coastal communities and beyond. Climate change is already evident in those areas and is going to continue having drastic effects. And those ecosystems are very vulnerable, as well as coastal communities. So what is the purpose of our study? We wanted to do a global review on the topic in order to understand the logic of impact chains in coastal areas. We analyzed 289 articles on the topic. So what do we know about impact chains in coastal areas? Or what should we know? There is not much knowledge available, and where it is available, it is scattered across disciplines and at different levels. So there is a need to consolidate this knowledge in order for it to be more useful and understandable for awareness raising and policy making. What are impact chains? Impact chains is how a given climate stimulus spreads through the system via direct and indirect impacts. For example, if you follow the arrows, if a given stressor impacts an ecosystem, which produces services and benefits humans, but then if the stressor has a negative impact on the ecosystem, then the ecosystem isn't able to produce as much services, which then affects what the humans could gain from them. So there is a need to understand the combined effects. Tropical storms are a low-pressure system that forms over warm tropical waters and are accompanied by violent winds and waves and can approach the coast in every direction. And they are going to continue having increased effects on the coast. So this is an impact chain. I know it kind of looks intimidating right now, but once you start, at the first glance it looks intimidating, but once you look at it in detail, it starts making sense. It can be divided into two parts. The natural part, how storms are affecting the natural systems, such as seagrass beds, coral reefs, and mangroves. And then it can be divided into another part, which is how storms affect coastal communities. As a first example, I'm going to focus on how storms affect mangroves, and then I'll focus on how storms affect coastal communities. So this is an impact chain. This shows how a hurricane, well, I took an example from Cahoon, 2003, which studied the Hurricane Mitch on the coast of Honduras. So the hurricane hit the coast and broke the trunks of the mangroves and also uprooted trees due to violent winds, which then led to elevation loss due to erosion, which then led to peat collapse as there was pressure on the soil due to tree mortality. And this consequently led to the low recovery of the ecosystem because the seeds weren't able to sprout in the damaged soil, and consequently mangrove degradation and loss, which in the end leads to loss of ecosystem services. So once again, this is the mind map, and we're now going to look at the example of storms and coastal communities. This time I took an example which was located in India by Badola in 2005. This is how a cyclone, this impact chain shows how the cyclone brings storm surges to the coast and overland flooding. This study showed that some villages, coastal villages, were protected by mangrove due to the mangroves as they acted as a buffer role. But without the mangrove, it could have directly, the stressor could have directly led to the loss of life and property, or indirectly went through first saltwater intrusion into agricultural yields, which would have led to the loss of livelihoods and to the increase of vulnerability of coastal communities. Now I'm going to continue talking about another stressor, which is sea level rise, which is the most certain outcome of climate change. It is the expansion of water due to the increase of sea temperatures, and it is expected to keep increasing. And in this specific study, it was the key stressor, the stressor that was mainly talked about. So once again, this is another type of impact chain. You can see again that it can affect the natural system, coral reefs, mangroves, and general biodiversity, but also coastal communities. First, I'm going to look at sea level rise and how it is affecting corals. And then, once again, I'll look at how it's affecting coastal communities. So, sea level rise brings sedimentary suspension through erosion and sediment transport, which then increases the turbidity of the water and affects the photosynthesis that is needed for corals, which brings stress to the corals and starts the bleaching process, which affects their health negatively and reduces the overall cover of the coral, and once again can then lead to the loss of ecosystem services. Here again, to show you that we're going to continue with sea level rise in coastal communities. So this is another example to show how livelihoods are lost. Due to reduced coral cover, there is a reduced habitat for the fish that live within the corals. And so there's a migration of fish or a decrease in the number because predators are able to eat the rest of the marine organisms. So this leads to loss of livelihoods, which then can increase food insecurity for coastal communities and the overall vulnerability of this human system. So as I said earlier, our study was a global review, literature review, and there is clear gaps in the knowledge out of 289 articles, there was mentions of stressors directly affecting ecosystems 351 times, whereas the stressor affecting directly humans there was only 39 examples. And another knowledge gap is how buffers are understudied, whereas they play a crucial role for the survival and well-being of coastal communities, like when I mentioned how mangroves protect the coastal areas and consequently the habitats and livelihoods of coastal communities. So my key message is how coastal ecosystems are underexplored options for adapting to climate change. Although there is potential to study it through the provision of ecosystem services, which is the base of ecosystem-based adaptation. Ecosystem-based adaptation is the managing of ecosystem services to help people adapt to climate change. So, as a conclusion, and for further research, the general conclusion of the study was that there is a need for integrated and adaptive management of costs for adaptation, and there is a clear need for more research on human systems in relation to coastal ecosystems, as everything is connected once a stressor impacts the ecosystem. And this is why understanding impact chains is important. And there is also a clear need to explore ecosystem-based adaptation potential, as it takes in consideration both the human perspective and the natural perspective.
Thank you very much.